Yesterday I did a short where I asked people what they thought the worst sword in the history, in all of history was. In another short, I said which sword I thought was the worst. I said the Viking sword. Now, some people thought I was just rage baiting, and a few people I know were like, were you being serious? And so I thought I would just let you guys know. Okay, to be fair, some people did put the Urumi, which I think is how you pronounce that. You know, that one actually is pretty bad. But let me actually show you what an Urumi is. They call it the whip sword. And in some instances, as you can see, they will have multiple strands on them. Deadliest Warrior is not the most scientifically accurate on everything, but one of the things that I did appreciate about what they did, they actually took historical weapons and did real testing with them, and the audience got to see what these weapons were actually capable of. Ballistic gelatin torsos being used, pig carcasses being used, and you got to see them being used against armor and stuff like that. For all of its flaws, Deadliest Warrior did have a couple of good things about it. They did an episode with this weapon and where they actually tested it, and it looked like it did absolutely nothing. I wonder if this is actually an Urumi or if this is just a sword that was bent, because this actually seems pretty short. And just like with a lot of martial arts, how it starts off as a warrior form or whatever and then can transition into an art. And so the art doesn't necessarily reflect how it really was. Kind of just like in modern fencing, a foil is not a good representation of a sword. Some people might debate me on that, but I think you're wrong if you disagree. Anyways, on some of these, they look quite long, and I guess on some of these, they are shorter. So maybe the shorter ones are actually more effective. I don't know. I don't know when a super flexible floppy sword would be that good, ever, really. Anyways, so some people said this sword, and you know what? I agree. Yeah, this one is pretty bad, I think. I said the Viking sword, which, to be fair, I think is more deadly than the Urumi. However, I also think it is way more uncomfortable to hold. And so, was I being serious about the Viking sword being potentially the worst sword in all of history? Yes, I was being serious, because this is a great example. Here, look at this one here from Cult of... Now, this is not to say that Cult of Athena is bad at making swords, or whoever made this is bad at making swords. I think just the design is terrible, not the person making this. So we have a really short guard here that really doesn't protect your hand that much. It's mostly to stop your hand from slipping up. And then you have your pommel here. Something interesting that people have pointed out is the fact that the pommel and the guard are lined up pretty evenly. And so one theory is that you would take your sword and push it against your shield using the pommel and the crossguard, and then you're able to push with your shield more effectively in some sort of shield wall, and that would help prevent your hand from getting damaged. So if you happen to use a shield on a regular basis, then you might not want something with a big crossguard, because then it can get in the way of your shield. So all of that makes sense. However, I think the big issue is how uncomfortable these pommels are. I have owned 3 different versions of a Viking sword, and every single time they're just so incredibly uncomfortable that I get rid of them. Let's look at a couple different ones, and you can see here this pommel, you have this sort of flat thing. If you ever thought a wheel pommel was uncomfortable, which I can tell you there are some uncomfortable wheel pommels. Let me show you this one here. This is an arming sword from, I want to say Windless, that I got from Cult of Athena. It did not come with this frog. I don't remember where I got this from. And this has a giant wheel pommel, and it has a small handle so that your hand bumps right into the wheel pommel here. And that's the other thing with these Viking swords, is that the handles are small. You do not have a lot of room. Like you hold it one way. That's it. You hold it in a hammer grip. Although there's this guy named Roland, and he suggests that you hold the sword with 2 fingers on the pommel, that you hold it like this. I think he's incorrect. I think you're supposed to hold them in a hammer grip. This wheel pommel will dig into your skin and is uncomfortable and prevents you from casting the sword out, like, because the pommel here jams into your hand and it's uncomfortable. The hammer grip is meant to tell you that you are not supposed to cast the sword out, which is very restrictive. There's a lot of cuts you can use your wrist for, like snap cuts and things like that. Using your wrist is very effective and gives you some additional reach. With these swords here, it locks you into that hammer grip and prevents you from doing that. Now, are there other swords that do that? Yes, like the Talwar does that. Let me show you guys a picture of a Talwar. So here is a Talwar. You can see that it has a disc pommel, which again is very flat. So it locks your hand into this hammer grip. The Talwar can get away with it a little bit. These are still, in my experience, not very comfortable to hold. And I would also not put these very high on the awesomeness list. However, I would put them above the Viking sword because they have curved the sword. I think most people agree that having a curve in the sword enables or helps or assists in cutting. Can you have swords that are great at cutting and also be straight? Yes, you can. But the curve helps with the cut. And so you can see here that they have gone all out on the cut. Yeah, you could potentially do some sort of weird off-angle thrust, but you can see that this is primarily a cutting sword. And so they have made the sword curved to, again, assist with the cut. And they lock your hand into a hammer grip because they don't want you to do what they would consider weaker wrist cuts. They want you to do full, committed, passing step, strong from the arm, not from the wrist cuts. When you look at the sword and when you hold it, it feels like that's how the sword wants you to act. When you hold a Viking sword, It feels the same way. Unless you think I am just making this up just now. Let me show you this book that I had been working on for years and has been out for a while. Let me take you to, this is the S's for swords, and so are all the other letters. Let me take you to V, which I use for Viking sword, and you will see that I did not give the Viking sword a very good score. So I have always disliked the Viking sword. I wonder if that is the lowest scoring sword in here. I gave it 2.5 stars. Did I give any sword less than 2.5 stars? Oh. I gave the Utak only 2 stars. Sorry, the Philippines. Actually, let's just look up together what a Utak is so you can see. That's the Utak. I mean, it's pretty short. I think it looks kind of cool. It has like no guard at all though, so you also are not going to be able to stab. If you do stab with this, you're probably just going to slide right up onto the blade. But honestly, it's probably more comfortable than the Viking sword, just saying. Does anybody know of a great sword that starts with the letter U? Because so far we got the Urumi and we got the Utak, and both of those kind of suck.